All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is John, and I think I've seen or met many of you over the past couple of onboarding sessions. Part of the project team at Mathematica, working with BLH and OFA to facilitate this TANF learning community. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about LI squared. LI squared stands for Learn, Innovate, Improve. And as the name suggests, there are 3 phases to that process. But aside from getting into kind of what is it and how to use it, I also hope that today you'll walk away feeling like you have both a way of thinking about and some actionable steps to begin your learn phase journey. That is to really begin the work that you're doing as part of the TLC, and to do that by learning. And we'll talk more about exactly what that means, what it can look like. But our objectives for today are to understand the purpose and the high-level process of LI squared, to understand the objectives of each of the 3 phases. What are they? Why would you use them? And then you'll have an opportunity in some breakout rooms with your coach and liaison to work through a learn phase activity. Just one simple way to get your creative juices flowing and start to apply some of these methods for yourself. And so there'll be 3 different activities to choose from. You'll have a chance to kind of think about which one might best suit your team's needs right when you get into the breakouts and jump in. And then we'll close out with a debrief of what's bubbling up for you. As I mentioned, I hope that by the time you leave today, that there's at least one action step that you can pursue with your team and in partnership with your coaching team to begin this work in earnest. So with that, I'll just pause and see if anybody from the OFA team wants to say anything before we get started. Oh, Lisa, we can't hear you. You might be double muted.
I'm double muted again.
There we go.
I just wanted to say so much for your willingness to train us on LI squared. I learned something new at each presentation, and thank you to the sites who are here. John is an excellent trainer and able to take the theory and make it very practical to you. So I hope you get a lot out of this training today. And thanks, Jeanette. I know she's around somewhere. Thanks. Bye-bye. Not bye-bye, but...
Thank you so much, Lisa. And just one request before I get started. You know, I recognize that we're all a bit fatigued with being in Zoom meetings and virtual trainings and all that sort of thing. I so wish we could be together today in person. It will help me if I can see and engage with you as if we were in a virtual room today. So if you're willing and able to turn on your video, that'll just recreate a little bit of what we're missing. And so I would just invite you to do that if you can and if you're willing. But by all means, take yourself off video at any point if you need to. And then please feel free to use the chat. We're a lot of people on a call today. It's not going to be possible for everybody to speak. At any time, feel free to just put your random musings, your questions, your complaints, your pontifications, anything into the chat, and just let it flow. And I'll also try to pause occasionally and address questions that are coming up. And so, yeah, just would welcome your engagement to make this as good as it can possibly be today. All right, with that, let me talk a little bit about why you should even care and not leave the Zoom call right now. What is helpful or important to you at the front lines of human services delivery about implementation science, or this thing I'm calling LI squared? Part of what I think matters about this is that implementation science, whether you've heard that term before or not, really relates to how you get your programs to succeed. Because your programs rest on a team of people executing on a strategy with fidelity to deliver the services that are meaningful, impactful to the residents and the community members that you serve. And the only way to do that is to know and to have some high degree of confidence that what we intend to do is actually what is happening in these programs, and that is both responsive and like the right strategy to the needs of the families that we're serving. Implementation science is about understanding how do we get best practices really well implemented in different contexts and sustained over time. LI squared is about managing change. And I'm guessing that many of you deal with change on a month-to-month basis, if not a week-to-week basis, right? Change is constant, especially this day and age. And so having a strategy for managing change, and in particular, managing change in a way that is systematic and built on research methods and research findings, that's what LI squared is trying to do, but not in a way that requires you to go get a PhD in research methods, but that really just breaks it down in terms of the types of tasks and activities that you would be conducting in your program and how you could use analytic methods to achieve some of those goals. There's also part of this that's about we can do so much better. Here's just a sampling of some of the most impactful interventions in public assistance programs that have been studied by rigorous evaluations. And without getting into bar charts and statistical significance and all of that stuff, the key takeaway here is that if you look at these 5 programs, what's noticeable is that those blue bars represent sustained employment for the programs, and none of them exceed 50%, right? And so if these are some of the most impactful employment programs in our field, and the best ones are achieving less than 1 of every 2 participants getting and sustaining employment, then applying a growth mindset here, we got a lot of opportunity for growth. There is so much more that we can do to make our services impactful for families. And I'd like to argue that part of that is not that we don't have enough good ideas on the table. In fact, there are a lot of good ideas out there. There are a lot of great interventions and program models, some of which you may be operating right there in your state, in your county, in your tribe. But in fact, one of the biggest obstacles, and because I sit in the research world, I know that many of the evaluations that are sponsored study programs that are really interesting, but show no impacts on the key outcomes that we care about: education, employment, employment retention. But the ideas are good. It's rather that the implementation, the execution is not so good, right? We take ideas and we throw them into a context sometimes, or we come to somebody like you, a researcher, says, hey, would you implement this new intervention? It's great. It holds a lot of promise. And you agree, oh, yeah, sure, we'll be a part of that demonstration project. We roll it out, and then it doesn't stick. It doesn't actually transform practice in a way, and therefore, when a research team comes in and studies it, they don't really find any differences. So part of this is about, I think there are a lot of great ideas. This learning community represents at least 10 really good ideas. And the potential here is to focus on, let's get them really well designed and well implemented so that they can demonstrate impacts on the outcomes that we care about, like employment, like stable housing, like educational attainment. The other point I want to make here is that we need to focus a lot on implementation because it is hard. It's darn hard. In the healthcare sector, researchers have estimated that it takes about 17 years from the point of scientific discovery of some sort of an innovation to widespread adoption by healthcare professionals. That's a long time, right? Think about what was happening 17 years ago today, what our technology looked like then, what the topics of conversation were then, what dominated the news media then. A lot has changed in 17 years. And so if we're talking about years, if not decades, to get systems change to take hold, then implementation is going to require a whole lot of effort on our part, probably more effort than we're putting into it. And if you take hand washing, for example, something that we, I think, universally take for granted, has really proven its importance over the last couple of years. In the 1870s, surgeons were beginning to use hand washing to prepare for surgery, but it wasn't until the 1980s, so 110 years later, that the first national hygiene guidelines were released to include hand washing, right? I mean, that is just sort of funny how this sort of thing takes so long to become formalized as a practice. So changing practice, changing what we do takes time, and it takes intentionality. And so as you begin your work in the TLC, I think it's really important to have that mindset going forward, right? You've got some great ideas about how you want to change your program to transform service delivery for participants and achieve better outcomes. Recognize right here from the start that it's going to take time, probably more than the 12 months we have together, and it's going to take a great bit of intentionality in figuring out how do we get people to change their behavior, to change their practice, and do these things that we're coming up with to improve our programs. For you all, I think it's also helpful to kind of get your bearings in this implementation journey. And so for most of us here, we're going to spend the majority of our time in the pre-implementation and implementation phases. All right, so what does that practically mean? Well, it means that you're probably either planning to implement something or you're already implementing something. I don't think anybody's here because they've moved on and they're ready to just scale up this really successful program across an entire region of the country. We're really trying to do that pre-implementation work of what does our model really look like? What are the components of this recipe that are going to make it successful? Are we ready to implement this thing? What's going to get in our way of implementing, and how should we proactively address those potential barriers? Or you're in the implementation or moving toward the implementation phase, which means you're starting to pilot it. You want to gather some information about how it's going, what's working well, what's not working well, how should you pivot, revise your plans accordingly. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time together. And so in order to do that pre-implementation, that design and planning work really well, or the implementation, which is the piloting, iterating, and refining work really well, we need some tools. And so I want to suggest that doing implementation, which is what you guys spend most of your time doing, will benefit from a framework and a process model. A framework because that helps us think about it differently. It helps us put into perspective what we need to do and how we should do it. But we also then need a process model to help us operationalize it. That is, what are the steps that we're going to take? How can we be systematic, both effectively and efficiently manage our time in the TLC, right, between now and December, to make this thing a reality? And so that's where I want to suggest that the Learn, Innovate, Improve, or LI2 framework and process model can come into play. It does both. LI2 was designed with and for TANF practitioners. It was an initiative entirely sponsored by ACF in partnership with TANF practitioners to think about how do we manage change that draws on research methods, but also makes it really accessible and practical for people at the front lines of human services delivery. And so that's what I want to share with you today, what it looks like, how to use it, and give you a chance to go into a breakout room and try it out. So here's LI2 graphically represented. 3 phases, as I mentioned before: learn, innovate, improve. Not a linear process, cyclical and iterative in nature. The reason for that being is that for some of you, you may be coming in with a solution, with an idea, with an intervention ready to go. For others, you're not really sure, right? You have come in with some ideas and some goals and some priorities, and so maybe you need to do a little bit more learning and defining before you're ready to implement something. Regardless, there are multiple on-ramps and off-ramps to this process, but wherever you start in the LI2 journey, it leads back into the other phases. So you might start with improving, right? You might start with something you already have. Let's test it and figure out ways to improve it. And that leads right back into learning and innovation. Or it might be that you're starting right there from the learn phase and saying, what is our motivation for change? That leads you to innovation and design, which leads you to implementation and improvement. So I'm going to talk about each of these 3 phases, but right up front, I want to name that this does not have to be a step 1, step 2, step 3 in every single situation. It's also really important that you embrace the continuous learning and the cyclical nature of this framework. My hope, my vision and aspiration for all of you is that you round this cycle multiple times during the TLC. Because the key to getting innovation to really stick and succeed is that we start small and we build momentum by realizing either those successive small wins or building off of and learning from failures. And I think it's important that in our context that we embrace the idea, if we're going to do something innovative, if we're going to take some risks and really think outside the box, that territory involves failure. And so what we want to do is we want to limit the failure, but also embrace the fact that it will happen. And how do we create a safe space where we can try something out, realize it doesn't work quickly, and adapt in a way that minimizes the impact on both staff and participants so that we can continuously get better. I mean, this is already happening all over the place. It's just that we might not have a systematic process for capturing the learning from failure and turning it into further innovation. Another really key principle for all of this work is that we think about people being at the center of the process, right? And some of these words on the screen are particularly buzzy these days, but I think they're both important and practical for what we want to do together using this process. Diversity is important because LI2 is about forging partnerships that reflect the lived experiences of end users, right? So not just what our design team, what our implementation team might come up with, but also frontline staff, program participants, and community members. What are their perspectives on the problem that needs to be solved? What do they have to say about the potential design of a home visiting model and how it might work for them? What do they have to say in terms of feedback about our pilot of this new job development curriculum? So at every phase of the process, whether we're learning, innovating, or improving, diversity is key to building the best possible solution. Equity is also important because I think we should have a lens on why are things working for certain groups of people and communities and why are they not working as well for other groups of people. We should lean into and explore the disparities, the differences in outcomes and experiences. What is it that's driving the marginalization of some communities, whereas other communities are not experiencing the same marginalization or lack of outcomes? How might we change the status quo? So this is, I think, an invitation to be curious and to lean into those differences and disparities that you see in your program data and in the experiences of your staff and your participants, and ask why, and use this process to explore those more deeply. And finally, it's about inclusion, because at every stage of the process, we want to facilitate a highly collaborative and participatory design in which all members of your team and members of the community are represented, contributing expertise and help to shape the work. Right now, we need to do that tactfully and sometimes efficiently. So that's going to require some intentionality and some planning. How do we get participant voice actively engaged in the process? We can't do that haphazardly. Otherwise, it won't happen. I've been there. I've tried that. We need a plan from the beginning to figure out how participant voice is included throughout the entire process. So diversity, multiple perspectives, multiple voices. Equity, think about why things are and are not working for different communities and lean into that with curiosity. And then inclusion, let's make sure that we're bringing all of our different stakeholder and partner groups to the table at every stage of the process, because these 3 elements will really lead to a design that generates more buy-in and better outcomes for the communities that we serve. So let's talk a little bit about the learn phase, and I'm going to cover each of the 3 phases here at a high level before we get more deeply into the learn phase, which is where I imagine many of you will start your work under the TLC. So there are 3 main objectives in the learn phase. And so with any potential change, with any intervention that you're thinking about, a program redesign, or even something as simple as redesigning your intake form. I think it's important to make sure that we've addressed all three of these. The first is that we identify, clarify, and prioritize why it is that we're making a change. What is our motivation here? To frame that a different way, you might ask, what problem are we trying to solve? And to bring a diversity and inclusion lens to that, according to whom is it a problem? How will it affect people if we make this change? Who stands to benefit? Who stands to lose something? Right? Really unpack why we're changing. Because unless we have some consensus or deeper understanding about why we're making a change, what problem it is we're trying to solve, then we're likely going to experience some fragmentation in the change that we go about making. Right? Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you're likely to end up someplace else. And I think that's really true and important to keep in mind as you begin your learn phase journey. Be really clear about where it is you're going. Why are we changing? Second, take some time to identify and to meaningfully engage your stakeholders. Mark and others on the team here did some excellent work in December to outline and discuss what it means to identify and engage your stakeholders. And so that's a resource that those of you who are new to the TLC can go back to and learn from. But those are some practical tips for how you can do this, how you can bring your stakeholders, your partners to the table and understand how should they be involved? What perspectives do they bring to this work? Whether they're naysayers or whether they're champions, early adopters, active resistors, doesn't really matter. You need to account for their role in the change process and to partner with them. Some of the most eye-opening work that I've done with teams over the years is to do a stakeholder mapping exercise where they think about who's at the table and who's not at the table. And more often than not, where we get to by the end of that exercise is realizing we have way more partners for change than we ever thought we had. That doesn't make it easy, but it does mean that you have a lot of people who can be part of the work. And the more ways that you meaningfully involve them in the work, the more buy-in they'll have for the change that you're trying to achieve. Third, and if there could be a most important objective in this phase, it would be assessing your environment. Context is so crucial to our work that it is really important that we take some time before we ever begin implementing anything to consider what in our environment is going to help and hinder the change that we're trying to make. Right? If we're trying to implement a whole new coaching model that moves away from transactional and compliance-oriented approaches to TANF employment services, we need to take a good hard look at, say, our organizational culture, at the skills and competencies that our staff hold, and whether or not those are things that are going to help us with what we're trying to achieve or hinder us. Right? Is this going to be wind in our sails, or is this going to be a headwind we're going to encounter in our implementation journey? By pausing and thinking about those things right from the beginning, it helps us plan for them. It actually helps us tailor our implementation to our environment rather than just sort of looking to, oh, there's this cool coaching model that we could adopt. Let's train staff on it and ask them to implement it. Oh, well, what about this model is going to jive with our organizational culture? What about this model is going to jive with the skill sets that our staff bring to the table? What isn't going to jive? What's going to be awkward, difficult? Where do we think staff are going to resist? Where do we think participants are going to resist? Do we have the organizational capacity to pull this off? Those are the types of questions we want to be asking in the learn phase, asking them honestly, asking them of diverse groups of people, and using that input to help shape our plan for change. And secondly, related to this environmental piece, it's also important to consider, are we ready for change? And I'll talk more about how you can do that in just a few minutes. So in the learn phase, these are the three primary objectives that you're trying to hit on. Some of you may be coming into the TLC having done one, two, or all three of these things. That's great. Some of you may be like, well, we haven't done any of that. Are we behind schedule? No, not at all. And for some of you, you may have done it, and you may find 2 months from now, you really need to revisit and redo some of it. That is okay. welcome to innovation. It's iterative, there's lots of learning, and we always come back to learning. Building on what you learn in the learn phase, the innovate phase is all about taking that and beginning to define a solution that's adapted and customized to your environment. And so here I want to distinguish how we define the solution. Because how many of you have ever been a part of a logic model or theory of change development? I'm guessing quite a few of you, right? So, and logic models are great. I work at a research organization. We love our logic models. One of the things that the traditional logic model falls short on is distinguishing how we achieve the change versus what the change is. Logic models do a really nice job of articulating what the change is, right? We've got our inputs, we've got our activities, we've got our outputs, we've got our short and our long-term outcomes. Looks great. But so often I've seen theories of change in logic models that fail to fully articulate how do we get that change to actually take root and hold. And so this is where I want to talk about defining your solution. That is, what is your innovation? What are the key components? But also, what are the strategies that you're going to use to implement that solution? That's a subtle but really important difference to getting things to work. And perhaps more helpfully framed, this is how do you change people's mindsets, behaviors, and skill sets? How do you facilitate that organizational and structural shift so that you can actually use a coaching model with your participants? And so as a part of the Innovate phase, you'll have the opportunity to work with your coach to develop a roadmap for change, which really is a logic model, but it's simplified and more practice-oriented around these two key questions. What is it, and how do we get it to stick? And the way that we design that is we think about those factors that are going to help us and hinder us from the learn phase, right? Because if we've mapped some of that out in the learn phase of what are those potential barriers, what are those potential enablers of the change that we want to see happen, then we can also think more concretely about, oh yeah, well, what strategies do we need to use to change staff mindsets, behaviors, and skill sets? What strategies are we going to need to use to help participants engage with us in this new approach? And of course, linking all of that to our measures for success creates a nice narrative. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it and get people to do it this way. And here's what success will look like. Left to right, right to left. That should present a really solid narrative and argument for why this thing is going to succeed. The Innovate phase also can benefit from a lot of creative thinking. And so I encourage you all to embrace the opportunity to include a wide variety of perspectives. Get your case managers involved, get your data analysts involved, get your participants involved, your community partners. Bring them to the table and thinking about how you define your solution, whatever it is you're working on as a team. Because if they feel like they're part of this innovation phase, they're much more likely to be part of that improvement phase with you. They're going to provide you meaningful feedback on, hey, this is working really well for us. Nope, this isn't working for us. We need to change this. It tees up your engagement downstream if you bring people in to that innovation phase, not just, hey, what do you think of this thing? Well, no, you are a part of designing this thing. So now I want you to go try it out, and I want you to give feedback on how it's working for you. And here's an example of what that roadmap for change can sort of visually look like, right? You've got your solution, core components of what it is you're going to do. And then you've got the change strategies. How will you change mindsets, behaviors, and skill sets of staff, partners, participants so that this thing actually works? That leads to outcomes, right? Measurable, real differences for you, your staff, your participants, your community. And then it's those influencers that link your change strategies to your solution. This is why we're using these strategies, because here are the things that are going to get in our way. Here are the things that are going to help us. And that was developed when we thought about what the solution is. right? So to apply a personal example here, if I want to replicate my grandmother's cake, right, and I can't replicate grandma, I need her to do two things for me. I need her to give me the recipe, which includes both the ingredients and the process steps, the technique for baking the cake, right? Think of the ingredients kind of as the solution, right? I've got all my components. I've got my molasses, I've got my flour, I've got my, sugar, I've got whatever. But if I just have a list of ingredients, right, I can throw ingredients at you all day long. But if you don't tell me how to actually bring those ingredients together to create the cake, I'm completely at a loss. And so it's these change strategies that will help me not only know how to do it, but it might also be, the little nuances around, well, don't just whip it, I'm going to tell you exactly the technique for whipping it. Maybe I'm going to show you how to whip it. Maybe I'm going to tell you exactly how long to let it sit. Oh, and if you're at this elevation, you might need to adapt it a little bit. You might need to bake at a higher temperature. You use this kind of pan, right? It's all those little intricacies of how you actually replicate the baking that make the difference. And so as you lean into your work, as you lean into your roadmap for change, think about this as your recipe for replication. If you wanted to hand this off, right? If you're sitting in Anne Arundel County and you would love for somebody in Nevada to be able to replicate this thing, you won't need to give them the whole recipe. What it is, the ingredients involved, but also how do you do it? How do you get people to adopt this and use it in the way it's designed to be used? Because if that piece is missing, then you've kind of lost the cake. All right, so then the improve phase. The improve phase is about taking that roadmap for change and not letting it sit on a shelf or in a researcher's file box, but actually making it your implementation tool, right? We've defined what it is and how to do it, so let's start trying some of that out. Start small, pick off just one of those pieces and ask a select number of staff or a select number of partners or with a few participants to try it out and give feedback. The key here is to focus on implementation before you focus on outcomes. One of the biggest pitfalls that I've seen in the field is that we use piloting to justify expansion rather than to figure out how to make it work better, right? A pilot process is really just buying ourselves 6 months to convince a director to let us make it full scale. But instead, use the pilot process to really get things working right. Focus on specific components of your solution, of your intervention, right? If you're rolling out a whole new electronic application process, like the team in North Carolina is doing, then you're going to need to test specific components of that whole process. Don't just build and roll out the whole thing at once, right? Pick off pieces and try those out, refine them, and repeat that until your goals are met. And oftentimes we encourage teams to start this with what we call a road test, right? So taking that roadmap for change, what is it that we want to try and learn first? State that in the terms of maybe 1, 2, or 3 learning objectives and questions. And then create feedback loops from your staff and from your participants to understand what's your experience trying out this new thing. Come back together after 4, 6, 8 weeks and say, what have we learned? We tried it out for a limited period of time. What does this tell us about what we expected, our roadmap? That allows you then to revise, refine your roadmap and test it again, or move on to the next component of your solution. So just to give you a sense of what this has looked like in a TANF program, the Baltimore Health Corps, which was developed in response to COVID-19, they hired more than 300 contact tracers, earning a living wage and health insurance, and that began in August of 2020. It was designed to last 8 months, but it got extended because of the continual need for contact tracing. And they were providing training and employment services to these contract tracers who were getting employment experience, but then would need a job, because we know, hopefully, that contract tracing will not be needed as much at some point. right? So this is giving people a job, providing them experience, at the same time thinking about how do we connect them to more sustainable employment that builds on those skill sets. In the learn phase, which happened really quickly, mind you, the agency had to think about how prepared are we to operate this program? Not because, oh, if we're not prepared, we just won't do it. No, they didn't have a choice. It's happening. But the key in the learn phase was what's going to help us, what's going to get in our way, and how do we plan for those things? And what that led to was when in the Innovate phase, they then thought about those things, those barriers, those issues that are going to get in our way with implementation of this health core. We need solutions that are going to address each of those. So the top 4 potential barriers that they identified, they came up with a solution for each of them. We think it's going to be so fast moving, people are not going to know who's doing what. We need clearly defined roles. How are these people who are doing contact tracing 8, 9, 10 hours a day, completely swamped, going to find the time to do their own job search and job prep for beyond the contract tracing role? They need well-developed career navigation structures, both in groups and one-on-one, holding them accountable, giving them the space to move forward with their own job search, not just doing the contact tracing that they were set up to do. They need a structured process to set and review their employment goals, not let that get lost in the mix of the work that they need to do. And they also need a really clear service map. There's so many potential services that people need to be connected to. Relying on every person to know every potential service is not feasible. So we need a central location that maps out all the potential services that are relevant. They use the Learn, Innovate, Improve process to operationalize and do this in a really fast-paced environment. And the team wrote a brief about it, which you can check out. There's a link in the slides there. And so to tee you up for some of the work that you're going to do early on in this project and that you'll get a little flavor for today in a breakout, I want to talk a little bit more about the learn phase here. So as you're thinking about your motivation for change, and as I mentioned before, let's be really clear about why it is we're changing. What problem are we trying to solve? So for you and your team, I pose the question, what's the why behind your what? You came here with some kind of a what in mind. And so are you clear on why that is what you want to do? Do you feel like your team is cohesive around that why? What problems are you trying to solve for? And according to whom is that a problem? Is it a problem because your director said it is a problem? Is it a problem because the data has a red line on that particular part of the report? Is it a problem because you're not meeting your WPR? For whom and according to whom are these things problems? There's no right or wrong answer there, but it's really important to be clear about these things. And so, again, some of you may have already done some work here. So maybe just consider, what have we already done to answer some of these questions coming into the TLC, and what more needs to be done? That will help shape some of the work that you start off with in partnership with your coach and with your team. Think too about, as you get clear on why you're pursuing change, it doesn't always have to be a problem that you're solving for. It could be an opportunity that you're taking advantage of, right? So there may be things that are pushing you to change, but there may also be things that are pulling you to change. What I mean by that is there's sort of this nudge from somebody that you need to change, a problem that needs to be solved, or it may be you may be tugged and pulled by a vision for a motivation to do things differently or better. I think I've already addressed some of the DEI lens on this, but making sure that you're always asking, according to whom and for whom are these things true? One thing that is a potential pitfall here that we want to avoid is that we skip too quickly over the learn phase and solve for the wrong problem, right? And so I like that this is illustrated really nicely in the double diamond of design, where you take a perceived problem and we go to a solution, right? Okay, low engagement, here's our solution to engage participants. But in fact, if we haven't done our due diligence to understand the problem, for whom it's a problem, why it's a problem, we could end up solving for a symptom, for something that isn't actually a problem at all, when there's a much deeper root cause that needs to be addressed. And so wherever that perceived problem is, let's do a bit of backward work to get to the root cause so that we make sure we get to the right problem before we start trying to right the problem. And so this double diamond of design is really key to the mindset here, that we always do a little bit of pausing, reflecting, and clarifying on what we understand or think we understand the problem to be before we try to solve for it. And in this work, right, I think it's important to recognize that many of the problems we face are not simple or technical problems. Right? There's a whole literature around adaptive leadership, and they talk about the difference between technical and adaptive problems. That I think is an important thing to bear in mind with this work, because as you think about what problems you're trying to solve for, most often you face adaptive problems. That is, problems that don't have a known solution. And yet, what is most common in the field of human services, broadly, is that we throw technical solutions at adaptive problems. So a technical problem is the oil change light in your car comes on, right? There's a technical solution for that. Go get the oil changed. Problem solved. But in your work, the problems that you face require changes in people's priorities, beliefs, habits, loyalties. It's going to require you to mobilize a discovery process to get people to shed entrenched ways of doing things, to potentially tolerate losses in their professional identity or behavior, and to generate new capacity for their work. That is not an oil change. That's a change management initiative that requires a lot of people at the table and really engaged, involved leadership of the change process. It's much more like a fever, right? You know you have a fever, but why do you have a fever? That's an adaptive problem. We need to get to the root of that and then figure out the solutions to address the fever. There's not just this readily known solution to address the fever, because the fever is just a symptom of something deeper that has gone wrong. And so be cautious and careful about how we conceptualize and then address the problems in our environment, because they may be more complicated and deeper than we first appreciate. So let me give an example of how a TLC team, our friends at the Chippewa CREE tribe, have done some of this learn phase work. The Chippewa CREE team, in partnership with their coaches, started out their learn phase on that motivation for change question, really trying to get clear, what is our vision for this, right? We wrote a proposal, we got accepted, here we are, we're excited and ready to do this work, but what do we want our program and our community to look like if we're able to do it in a way that is grounded in our cultural values, right? That honors our tribal traditions and language and culture. Like, what does that really look like for us? What's the concrete vision that we can all gather around and get excited for, right? And so they went through this sort of vision mapping exercise to clarify, not just with the couple of folks who wrote the proposal, but with the whole team. What is this vision? A safe and thriving community where people are able to connect with each other, with themselves, and with our culture. All right, so what are the components of that? What does that mean? Well, for them, it means respect for families. The family is a really important part of the culture. It means connection to community and culture, teaching and celebrating cultural practices and traditions, right? And so they were able to really dissect this and get the team unified around the motivation for change, not just, right, here's what was in our TLC proposal, so let's run with it. They also have taken some time to review their 3 different service sites, which are geographically dispersed in the northern rural part of Montana. Right? What's going on in one location looks different than one of the other service locations, even though they're all part of the same tribe and same community, because they're so geographically dispersed. All right, so thinking about the second objective for the learn phase, engaging your stakeholders. Some prompts for you to reflect on here. Who's at the table? You've already got some team members here on the call today. Who else is at the table that maybe isn't represented on the call? And then who's not at the table at all? Who are some people, some stakeholders, some partners that you would like to bring to the table? And what's your plan for doing so? As you think about your different partners and stakeholders for change, I really like this grid of considering what are their potential gains, losses, loyalties, and values. Because what that can allow you to do is first and foremost, empathize with your stakeholders and partners. What do I perceive to be their gains, losses, loyalties, and values? What do they stand to gain? What do they stand to lose? What or who are they loyal to, right? What's important to them? And values, what are their principles and the things that matter most to them? If you can spend some time thinking about that for your key stakeholders, and then you go and engage them with that lens in mind, it also creates an opportunity for you to bring them into the fold with a more empathetic understanding of where they're coming from. You might just also need to ask people their perspectives on these things, right? And so just consider how your understanding of your stakeholders can create a more meaningful engagement with them. Finally, how might you prioritize the voice of the end user, which so often can get lost in this work because we're busy and we're trying to get the work done. I'm certainly guilty of that. How might, from the get-go, we prioritize the voice of the end user? So for you, whether that is a data analyst, someone in ITS, a program participant, whoever the end user of your solution is, let's think about their perspective. And so again, you may have already done some work in this space. What additional work needs to be done to make progress here? A couple of quick examples. The North Dakota TLC team did some really neat work that they called current versus aspirational empathy mapping. So the team thought about, all right, we've got this vision of modernizing the North Dakota TANF program. What are families' experiences right now? And they thought about it in terms of what do families think, do, feel, and say. And they replicated that for frontline staff and supervisors and community partners. I know you can't see that on the screen, but I just wanted to give you the visual of the empathy map work. And then they came back a day later and they thought about, all right, that's the current situation. What's our aspiration? And they answered those questions for all 4 stakeholder groups as if their vision had become reality. A modernized 21st century responsive TANF program in North Dakota. What would we want families, frontline staff, supervisors, and community partners to be thinking, doing, feeling, and saying? And it helped them to both ground their motivation for change and their vision, but also to think about how they could engage their stakeholders to make the current empathy map the aspirational empathy map. Or take, for example, the work that the North Carolina TANF Learning Community team did. Some amazing work on stakeholder mapping and thinking through this electronic application process, dividing it into these 4 dimensions of, all right, the technical specifications and systems integration of this rollout, right? How do we build this and connect it to our existing systems? Implementation at the county level, right? We're the state. This is going to have to roll out at the county level. So what are the considerations there? How do we coordinate with other state and our federal partners in this? And then 4th, what are our customers' needs? Even though they might not have direct interaction with some of these IT functions, they are going to complete the application online. And so what are their needs? How do we account for their perspectives in this build? And so they did some initial brainstorming, and then I know it's fine print, but on the right-hand side, they came up with this very detailed stakeholder engagement plan for each of these groups, specific strategies to get their input and engagement, to think about how they facilitate buy-in and gather feedback from these stakeholders at every stage of the process. And the last component here of the learn phase is, are we ready? Again, the answer can be no to that, and that is okay. In fact, I would say the vast majority of teams I've worked with, there's some aspect of their program or environment that is not ready for the change that they want to implement. So if you answer, yes, absolutely, I'm going to be much more skeptical than if you answer no. The point is, take some time to slow down and get clear about why it is we don't feel like we're ready and what can we do about it? What can we do to get ready? A helpful frame for thinking about this is a tool called the Readiness Thinking Tool from the Wandersman Center. And they define it in terms of these 3 different buckets. Momentum. Are we committed to making this change happen? And the tool has some really helpful reflection questions on that front. Second, do we have the general capacity to facilitate this change? Like, regardless of this new thing we're going to bring into the mix, how well do we function on a day-to-day basis? Because if we're not functioning well as a team, that's probably going to get in the way of this change that we want to realize. And then third, what's our change-specific capacity? So thinking about the thing we want to do differently, how well are we equipped to actually implement and sustain that change? And so as you consider your own readiness, it might be that which of these for your team seems strongest, which may seem weakest, and why is that the case? What could you do in the early stages before you ever begin rolling and implementing anything? What could you do to build some momentum, to strengthen general capacity or improve your change-specific capacity? All right, so one last example, and then we're going to get ready to go into breakout rooms. The Larimer County team, as a part of the TANF learning community here, they've been thinking about how do we build an exemplary internship program. They have a history of doing this, but they're kind of resetting and they're recalibrating right now. They're going to start in-house and then they want to expand. They want to go bigger out into the community. So this team spent a good bit of time trying to understand, what do we know? What do we know about how the internship program is operated? How current and past interns have experienced it? What do we know about the current, past, and potential work sites, right? Employers' perspectives. What's important to them in all of this? What has been important to them? And then bringing that data to think about these key questions for department managers. What gets in the way of successfully hosting interns? What can we learn from other Colorado counties? How do you intern? Third, do we expand beyond DHS or do we keep it in-house? Because it's really easy to do internships in-house relative to coordinating with all of these other businesses and employers, but there could be big payoffs. So what do we think? Should we or should we not? And how might we build a database for cataloging and identifying local internship opportunities, this knowledge management piece? All right, so as a part of their exploring the environment and considering, are we ready? These were some of the methods and the questions that they were asking before they ever began designing what this internship program is going to look like. They're still in this phase right now. So I hope this helps just to sort of both conceptualize what this looks like, but also make it real, right? Here's what TLC teams have been doing over the past 4 or 5 months to use some of this stuff. And so now I want to give you the chance to just play around with it with your coach. There's lots of potential methods to use in the learn phase, more than I could ever describe in a training. But today I want to give you 3 options to get started with in your teams. So this is about picking one and playing around with it. The first is problem tree analysis. So if it really resonated with you when I was talking about motivation for change, maybe lacking some clarity or some cohesion about why you're changing or what root problem you're trying to solve, this could be a great activity to more deeply understand the problem. You'll spend some time defining a problem statement as you currently understand it, and then you'll dig more deeply. What do we think some of the causes of that problem are? And then you'll go into thinking about what are some of the effects of that problem. And you'll close out with some prioritization. All right, we dug deeply, we explored these causes and these effects of the problem statement that we started with. What's most important, salient, or resonant with our team here? That could help you pinpoint some particular effects to solve, or rather to address, or maybe some causes to solve for. Or maybe you felt like your team hasn't quite centered in on what it is that's most important to you. And so there's a second activity that we want to offer you today called bullseye diagramming. This is really about taking several competing opportunities or problems that you're facing and choosing which one might be most important to address first. So you might start by laying out some of the opportunities or problems that you're facing, and then working together as a team to build consensus around what's of primary importance. Like if we could only solve 2 things by December, what would those 2 things be? And then let's think about what's of secondary importance, and then maybe third importance or tertiary importance. This exercise can help the team get clear about what's most important to start with. And you can think about importance in a variety of different ways. It might be impact, it might be feasibility. So talk that over with your coach and your team in your breakout and see if that would be helpful to you. And then third, we've got an activity called abstraction laddering, which is about considering or reconsidering and clarifying your understanding of the opportunity before you, right? You've got 12 months to work on this project, or the problem that you're trying to solve, by both broadening and narrowing this focus. So this exercise will force your team to think about, all right, we've got this statement of a problem or an opportunity. Why does that matter? And you're going to take it several layers, several rounds of asking the why question. If you've heard like the 5 whys, right, that's kind of what you're going to do here. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? Why does this matter? And then after you've done a couple rounds of why, you're going to do a few rounds of what? Or sorry, how? You're going to ask, we've got this problem or this opportunity, but now how would we operationalize it? And you'll ask that multiple times, and you'll build on the answers and the questions that are coming up. Well, this is how we could solve it. And then you take those responses and you consider, well, how would we operationalize that? Well, how would we operationalize that? And it will help your team to get a little more refined in your thinking about why you want to do something and how you might go about doing it. All right. So I know that we are just about 5 minutes behind schedule, but that's not too bad. Let me pause and see if there are any immediate questions or concerns. I didn't see anything in the chat as we were going along before we release you into breakouts. All right, so your coaches actually have your mural links. And so when you get into your breakout rooms, depending on the activity that you select, they will provide you either the worksheet or a link to a virtual whiteboard that you will be able to use for this activity. And yes, we will have the PowerPoint to share. If Casey Gray hasn't already uploaded it, it will be sent around or uploaded to this meeting invitation. And the recording will also be available.